Well, good evening, and welcome to week 2 of Engaging World Religions. Thanks for joining us tonight. I hope everyone's doing well out there. You're staying cool, some hot weather, and staying safe as well. Tonight we have a ton of material that I want to get to and try to get through in just this very short 2-week class. Quick reminder, if you missed last week, go to our website, click on that button that says previous content. It'll take you to our YouTube page and you can catch up on that information right there. I'm going to do a brief little recap in a moment as we get going here, but I want to open us first with a word of prayer. Let's come to God. Gracious and holy God, we give you thanks for the gift of this day and everything that is held in it. We thank you for all of the blessings that you pour into our lives. We thank you for the blessing of this time to come and learn. Just pray that we might be open to a time of have a spirit of learning. So I just ask that you would guide us through all of this. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Again, as we get started tonight, going into the class there, I want to actually begin by reiterating some disclaimers that I shared last week with you for those that were joining us. First of all, I want to make sure it's clear we understand this is not a comprehensive study of all the world religions. For those who were watching last week, I mentioned that there's something like 4,300 if you count all the different branches. But this isn't even a comprehensive study of all of the main world religions. But rather it's trying to take a mountaintop perspective, if you will, looking at things in what I would call families of faith. This is also not about debating the merits of individual world religions, if it's good or bad, if they're right or wrong, and pointing out faults or right. This is not what this is about, but rather this is about creating an understanding, to get a little bit of a perspective from some of the different world religions, but particularly see how there are some things that are in common, what we can learn from one another, and hopefully start building some bridges where we so often put up walls and find ways to come together, develop some respect. And I think along the way, as we learn a little bit about some of the other religions in the world, it actually points to some pretty important aspects of our own faith as Christians, which I believe that most of us, if not all of us watching, would believe ourselves and proclaim to be Christians. So with those kind of disclaimers out of the way and kind of the hope through all of this, I'm going to dive in and just do a quick recap from last week. I actually began last week talking about how there were 3 crises identified in the world. Now you can make an argument that there's actually more than 3, but these are 3 pretty big ones here. And we've got them named on the board. First of all, there's the crisis of environment. You included this would be things like pollution, lack of natural resources, a loss of natural resources, those kinds of things that have become to the forefront. We've become more and more aware of them in modern times, and definitely there is great concern about this creation that we are a part of. The second crisis that we talked about last week was personal identity, or rather a lack of personal identity. And with that crisis has come things like addiction in all different kinds of forms, prejudice, and those types of things there. And again, loss of sense of vocation, direction in our lives, all of that falls under personal identity. The final crisis was social cohesion. And this is a breakdown in our society. And we see that so much with all the different divisions, with the violence, with the hate, the disengagement of citizens. You know, rather than seeing things from the common good, it's become much more individualistic, much more narcissistic in that way too as well. So these are the 3 what we call big crises that we identify. And in response to that, based on the work of a Dr. Vern Barnett and some others, so one of the ways that we can address these 3 crises is actually looking to religions of the world, which throughout history have shaped the world. They've shaped peoples, they've shaped cultures. So much of governments, of policies, of traditions throughout the years have been shaped by religion. And as we look at these religions and these families of faith, we actually find an answer to these crises and to help us maybe reshape some of our perspective. So as we look at that, we have the 3 families of faith we talked about last week. They are the primal, the Asian, and the monotheistic. And so we're digging into each one of those a little more deeply tonight. I'm going to share with you some tenets of the things, a greater understanding, give a few more details of some specific world religions that are found with that, and again, kind of pull it all together in the end. So we're actually going to begin by talking about the primal religion. Now, when we look at all of these families of faith, last week I brought this up, is that what each of them are seeking to answer is this question: what is sacred? What is sacred? What is holy? What is set apart? What is the way, or what is it that we connect to the divine through, right? What is that avenue, that channel that we connect to the divine? And so, as we look at these, we're understanding where each one of these fall together. So we're going to look at primal. And first and foremost, where is the sacred according to the primal? Well, according to the primal religion, the sacred is found in nature. Nature is the place where we find that. Now, some of the world religions that you might include within that are going to be Native American. Most of the ancient religions, we have some of the Africans, Australian Aboriginal. Those are some examples of these these primal religions that we find. And each of them tends to connect to the divine, to see the divine through the aspect of nature. Now, one of the main beliefs of these primal religions is that the world is what it is, and they accept the world as it is. And rather than trying to change the world to do something different, the goal would be to see how we all fit into the world and understand how we are all so interconnected. And so primal religion sees all that through nature and understands that. And we start thinking about the divinities, if you will. So you talk about the great American religion, you talk about the Great Spirit and how the Great Spirit is so present in nature. Or you look at the ancient pagan religions that would have all these different deities, all these different gods. You know, if we really look at those and you start thinking about each one of them, you find that most actually connected in a way to nature in some capacity or another. You know, for example, in these pagan religions, you might have a god of the harvest, a god of the sun, a god of the moon, a god of the water, a god of fertility. You get all of these different connections to the natural world. So as we think about that, this is pretty self-explanatory. I don't want to spend too much time on the primal and going into detail about that, but I do want to share with you something that I think brings it to light. There's an excerpt that I have from something called Chief Seattle's letter. Now, Chief Seattle was a Native American chief, and it's where we get the name for the city Seattle, up in the state of Washington. Now, supposedly, when the white people were moving out westward and taking up the land and negotiating to buy up the land, so to speak, Chief Seattle wrote a letter to the president at that time. Now, it really can't be authenticated that this is real. There's different legends around all of it. But I still wanted to share with you part of it because I think it does a great job of highlighting this kind of idea of finding the divine, finding the sacred in nature in that different perspective. So this again is from Chief Seattle's letter. And I'm going to begin with this way here. It reads this, and again this is supposedly from Chief Seattle himself. The great chief in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land. How can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air or the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every clearing, every humming insect. All are holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. This beautiful earth is mother of us all. We are a part of it. It is part of us. The perfumed flowers are our sisters. The bear, the deer, the great eagle, these are our brothers. The rocky crests, the juices in the meadows, the body heat of the pony, all belong to the same family. The shining water that moves in the streams is the blood of our ancestors. The rivers are our brothers. They quench our thirst. They carry our canoes and feed our children. You must give the rivers the kindness you would give any brother. The air is precious to us, for all things share the same breath, beast, tree, man, and woman. The white people do not seem to notice the air they breathe. The wind that gave our grandfather his first breath also receives his last sigh. The wind, sweetened by the meadow flowers, also gives our children the spirit of life. So you get a sense as I read that, and that's a pretty common kind of way to speak from the Native American perspective. You see that sacredness in all of nature. You know, talking about bears and eagles and even the rivers as being brothers and sisters, that sense of relationship. So you find that way, that respect that was found. Again, that connected to nature, finding the divine in nature. Even tells of when they would take a life, for example, on a hunt, how they would stop and they would give thanks, right, for this particular animal giving its life to sustain them and their family. So again, there was just that great reverence and interconnectedness of nature, and that understanding that not only is nature special, but we are a part of it, and we are all connected to it. So that's the basis of the primal faith. And again, this is one that's pretty self-explanatory, and to understand that. So I want to move on to our second family of faith and spend a little more time here. And this is in the Asian religions of the world. Now, when we go to that question about what is sacred, the Asian religions answer it by the self. What is sacred is the self, a journey to the self, a growing level of awareness. The way that you connect through the divine, in a sense, if you have an understanding of divine, is through this increasing self-awareness and enlightenment. Some examples of these types of religions are Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. And again, each of these, while they're different, still tends to find this journey into the self to connect to what is sacred. Now, I don't want to go into all of them, but I actually want to talk about a couple of them to give you some real basics to understand a little bit more. And I think as I give you some details and some knowledge about a couple of these different traditions, it'll make sense how you see that sacred in the self coming to life. So where I want to begin tonight for the Asian religions is I actually want to talk about Hinduism. Talk about being Hindu, which is one of the largest religions in the world with a number of followers. Now, let me say first off that there are different branches of Hinduism, okay? And each one of them might have some different terminology, they might have some varying degrees of belief in how they interpret it, but they have the same root. And I want to share with you some things that are just at the basic of Hinduism. Again, kind of give you an overview and an outline of this religion to help you maybe understand a little bit more about it and the Asian religions themselves. So first of all, we start talking about it, and this might surprise you. If you were to think about how many gods are part of the Hindu faith, if you Google it, you're probably going to find something like, I've seen articles that say 330 million gods. I've seen other articles that say 33 million gods, and others that have all different kinds. And there's major gods, minor, there's all kinds of language around it. However, when you really get into studying the religion, you find that generally speaking, the core belief is that there is one supreme being. That actually many Hindus see themselves as a monotheistic faith. That they have belief in one God. Now, the name of this God is Brahman. So this would be the deity that they have for it. Now, what they say with all of these other gods is that actually all the other gods that you might have associated with Hinduism are just manifestations of the one true God, Brahman, in their sense of it. So this is their understanding of divine. Now, if you go a little bit deeper than that, you actually will find within Hinduism some who take a very Trinitarian approach. That's right, Trinitarian, just like Christianity, slightly different. And the fact that there is three gods, but they are one. And so you'd have Brahman, which is the creator. Then the next one that you would have would be Vishnu. And Vishnu is the sustainer. And finally, you have Shiva. And Shiva is the destroyer, which sounds very ominous, right? So depending on where you read your sources, you may see that these are three main gods of the Hindu faith, but you also see where these are actually the three in one. Again, a Trinitarian, that there is one, Brahma, but Vishnu, Shiva are all parts of the Trinity. Like we might say God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit as being three in one, a similar type of dynamic. Again, not all Hindus would take that approach, but that is something that can be found within it. Another thing about Hinduism is it does have its sacred text. It's actually called the Vedas, V-E-D-A-S. And so this would be their sacred text. So that kind of gives you a little bit about their understanding of divine. But now I want to talk about some other categories and some tenets, if you have, of the Hindu faith. Clear this one off. So the first thing I want to talk about is that within the Hindu faith, they believe that there are 4 stages of life. Now, I'm not going to write down the stages, but I'm going to give them to you. If you want to keep notes of them there, you can. The first stage of life is student. Right? Student is about preparing for life. And you're going to see these all really make a lot of sense when you think about just the stages of life in general. So the first stage of life would be a student, and that is a part of your life that prepares you for life. The second stage of life in Hinduism is householder. Now, householder stage is where you have a family. You have your jobs, right? This is where you have your children and so forth. So this is, again, adulthood that we would talk about. The third stage of life in the Hindu faith is retirement. Right? Again, so you see the natural order. I think we'd all agree with this. Yeah, you start out kids, you go to school, you're students, you become adults, and hopefully you get to retire on that. But retirement is a time in your life where you can spend more time studying, volunteering, and, this is a little interesting, detaching from family a little bit. Right? So it's kind of a growing to a freedom. Now, the final stage of life is called renunciation. There's another word called for sannyasa, but this was about being devoted to spiritual growth. Now, this stage of life can actually happen at the end of stage 2 or stage 3, but it's where you reach that point in life where you become free from your obligations and you can just devote yourself to spiritual growth. So these are the 4 stages in the Hindu faith, the 4 stages of life in the Hindu faith. Okay? So, with that foundation, in the Hindu faith, there are 4 goals. It's good to have goals, right? 4 goals in the Hindu faith. Now, the first goal is kama. Now, kama is about pleasure. Pleasure or enjoying worldly things, right? So this is something that, in the Hindu faith, this is something you're supposed to do. You're supposed to enjoy things. You're supposed to enjoy life. This is one of the goals, is to actually enjoy this life that we have. The second goal, is something called artha. Now, artha is about worldly success. That one of your goals in life is not only to enjoy it, to have pleasure, but to also have success, right? Do well, make money, right? Successful. The third goal in life is something called dharma. I should spell that. Got the H in the wrong place. Now, dharma is about ethical living. This is the way that you treat other people, living your life in a right kind of manner. Okay? The final and most important goal, really, in the Hindu faith is something called moksha. Now, moksha can be understood as liberation or salvation. Now, these are actually all 4 goals that you're trying to do, and they coincide. It's not like you have to go through one to get to the next, like you do the stages of life. But this is 4 goals as you set out in your life. These are things you're supposed to accomplish. I'm going to come back and talk about moksha in just a minute. So, in light of these, right, you got these 4 goals. The next tenet of Hinduism is understanding the 4 paths. So the 4 paths are the ways that we experience the divine or attain moksha. So moksha is not just a goal in life, the sense of liberation, but this is like the goal. It's like we talk about as Christians being saved, right? This is the goal of being liberated from all of that and fully connected to the divine. And so the way that you do this is through what's known as these 4 paths. All right? So the 4 paths to experience the divine and attain moksha in Hindu, first of all, is something called karma. And I'm going to guess you are all familiar with this one. All right? Karma, we have all kinds of things about karma. Karma means like there's a cause and effect, right? You know, how you treat people is going to come back around. We talk about that. Well, actually, karma is about your works and your duties. So it's about having the right kind of works. So one of the paths to attain moksha is about the kind of work that you do. Right actions is another good way to think about it. So right actions. Obviously, if you have the right kind of actions, it leads to good things for you in this understanding of karma. The second path is something called jnana. Now, this path is about knowledge. It's about growing in knowledge and seeking of knowledge. Okay? The third is called bhakti. All right? Bhakti is about worship. This is worshiping the divine. So one of the ways that you attain moksha is through worshiping Brahman. Remember our goal there, so through worship. And finally, the fourth one is called Raja. Now, I should probably add that each of these can be termed as types of yoga. I didn't want to use the term yoga too much because you think about, stretching out and doing different poses, which there is some of that into it. And in fact, what we think of as yoga, mostly here in our society, would be closely related to Raja. Raja is about meditation. This is about awareness and reflection. Okay? So these are the 4 paths. So remember we talked about how what is sacred is the self? It's about how you live, about the knowledge you attain, about your worship, about your sense of awareness and reflection, meditation. So again, you see this journey of self helping you to connect to the divine, to connect to Brahman in the Hindu faith there, and to attain moksha, this liberation or salvation. Now, one other thing that I want to share with you about this, they like the number 4. There's another thing in Hinduism called the 4 debts. I've seen some research that actually just say 3, but we're going to go with the 4. Now, the 4 debts in Hinduism say you're born with these things. You're born with 4 debts. First of all, you're born with a debt to God, right? Human beings get easy access to all the stuff that God's created. And since from the moment you're born, you get to be a part of everything, from the sun and the moon and the waters and the mountains, all the stuff that God created, you're born indebted already to God. You already owe God something because you're just given this, right? You get to be a part of it and enjoy it. The second debt is to the sages. This is those persons that had knowledge that pass it down. So for those who have passed knowledge down throughout the generations, you're born with a debt to them because you're going to inherit this knowledge. The third debt is to your ancestors, mostly your parents, because they gave birth to you and brought you into this world. And so you have this sense of your lineage. You have a debt to your ancestors. Finally, you have a debt to society, because according to the Hindu beliefs, every person with whom you have contact has an opportunity to give you something directly or indirectly, someone you can learn from, someone who can provide something for you. So you have this debt to society. So those are the 4 debts. So again, you see this whole sense about journey of self and this past, these goals and enlightening and connecting to the divine. One other thing that I would say that's an important aspect of Hindu faith is that Hinduism believes in reincarnation, that your soul is born again over and over. It continues, however, until you attain moksha. Right? Once you reach that level of consciousness, that level of awareness or enlightenment, that you will, that you fully join with the divine, because Brahman, the divine, is in all things. That moment when you finally reach that level, you reach moksha, and you're fully joined with divine, and that's when you stop the reincarnation process. All right? So that's a very quick overview of the basics of Hinduism, to give you a sense for them. And again, to kind of highlight that sense of self. Now, one other one that I want to share a little bit with is Buddhism. Now, Buddhism shares many things with Hinduism. However, there's some stuff that I want to talk about that is different. First of all, in Buddhism, there is no deity. There is no belief in a God, if you will. That's why sometimes they don't even refer to Buddhism as a religion, but rather Buddhism is just a way of life, going back to the teachings of Buddha. But within Buddhism, there are 3 universal truths. All right? So according to the teaching of Buddhism, there are 3 universal truths. Number 1, everything in life is impermanent and always changing. All right? Everything in life is always changing. That is a truth. Second truth, because there's nothing permanent, a life based on possessing things or persons won't make you happy. Right? Because everything's always changing. The more you attain, it's still not going to make you happy. If your life is based on possessing things or people, it's not going to make you happy. The 4th universal truth is there is no eternal or unchanging soul and self, but rather yourself is just a collection of changing characteristics and attributes. All right? Now, by those are 3 universal truths, there are 4 noble truths. I know it can kind of get confusing, right? 3 universal truths, and then we go to 4 noble truths. The 4 noble truths in Buddhism is this. Human life has a lot of suffering. Right? I think we understand that. The cause of suffering is greed. Number 3, there is an end to suffering. And number 4, the way to end suffering is to follow the middle path. Now, this is that way of life that's part of Buddhism. Buddha taught people not to worship him as a god, but rather to take responsibility for their own lives and actions. And what he taught them was called the middle way, as a way to nirvana, again, that sense of enlightenment. The middle way is not meant as a life of luxury and indulgence, but also not one that's too much about fasting and hardship. And so there are actually 8 guides for following the middle path. So we're going to talk about 8 guides of the path. Okay? So according to Buddha, if you're going to follow the middle path, there are 8 guides to it. First of all, there is right understanding and viewpoint, which is based on the 4 noble truths. Number 2, have the right values and attitudes. In other words, compassion rather than selfishness, as an example. Number 3, right speech. Don't tell lies, avoid abrasive speech, avoid gossip. Number 4, having right action. Help people, live honestly, don't harm living things, take care of the environment. Next is right work. That means do something useful and avoid jobs which harm others. Number 6, a right effort, which is about encouraging good, helpful thoughts, discourage unwholesome and destructive thoughts. Number 7 is right mindfulness. That's to be aware of what you feel, think, and do. And finally, right meditation. Calm minds, practicing meditation, which leads to nirvana. So those are some of the basics of Buddhism. Now, as I said earlier, this is not all there is to know. That would be quite a study just to dive into each one of those different faiths. But I hope in sharing some of those, not only to give you a little insight into a couple of really big religions, especially in the Asian world, Hinduism, Buddhism, to kind of get a little bit behind the mindset. Why is it they do some of the things they do? How do we see the sacred? How do we see that journey into the self through those religions? And again, just kind of gain a bigger understanding. All right, so that was our Asian faith, which brings us to our final family of faith, the monotheistic faith. Now, monotheistic means one God. And what is sacred in the monotheistic faith is essentially relationships. right? That we connect to God through divine, through relationships, and in particular through the history of God's covenant community. And part of this is revealed through a sacred text, a book. Obviously, we know in Christianity it's the Bible, right? In Judaism we talk about the Torah. In Islam we talk about the Quran. Now, obviously, as Christians, I'm going to work on the assumption that you have a pretty working knowledge of our faith and our traditions and our beliefs, right? And that's a whole other class to go into some of the faiths there. You can start with the Apostles' Creed. It's a good place to go with that. But we also know as Christians that Christianity is built on Judaism. Jesus was a Jew, right? So we see that connection, that continuum. In fact, we don't diverge until we get to Jesus. That's where things start to split off. So what I want to do tonight is talk a little bit about the third one, is about Islam. And I want to go back to my disclaimers, right? Because I know people have different kinds of feelings on things, and just remind you, this is not about debating the merits of it. This is just about, again, giving a sense of an understanding. And knowing that with all religions, there can be branches, there can be extreme versions of it, there can be twisting of some of the tenets of it, but these are the core things of Islam that I hope that will help you connect a little bit, get a little better understanding to it. So first of all, as I already said, the sacred text for Islam is the Quran. Now what's interesting is Islam, the word, the name of the faith, actually comes from a word that means submission or surrender to God or to the will of God. So in a literal sense, it's the meaning, Islam means submission or surrender to God and God's will. All right? Now, there is a big question when it comes to Islam. Is God the same for Christians, Jews, and Muslims? Do we all three worship the same God? Now, my first answer is depends on who you ask. Second thing I'd say is basically the answer is yes, with disagreement, right? There are those who certainly would not agree with it. And again, we're talking big, big picture. There is no doubt different views and understanding between how Christians and really Christians and Jews tend to understand God and God's interactions with the world, and how Muslims tend to do that. I do want to add, however, though, if you were to generally ask Muslims, is it the same God? Yes. Jews, and many Christians as well. In fact, the Second Vatican Council, and this is tied to the Catholic Church, right, the Vatican Council speaks on authority for the Catholic Church, actually affirmed that Muslims worship the same God. So, however you tend to feel about it, according to the Second Vatican Council, they affirmed it as being the same God. Now, as part of that, and shared beliefs, is actually belief in prophets, right? And the same prophets. I mean, Muslims believe in Abraham, Moses, etc. In fact, they even believe in Jesus, but they believe Jesus to be a prophet, okay? So not too indifferent from Jews, right? Because Jews didn't see Jesus as being divine, being the literal manifestation of God, but rather as maybe a good teacher or a prophet. Well, actually, Muslims tend to hold Jesus in very high regard as a prophet. But the last prophet, according to Islam, was Muhammad. Now, in Islam, there are actually 6 major beliefs, okay? So there are 6 major beliefs. You can write these down if you'd like to. So first of all, the first belief for Muslims is belief in one God, right? Again, monotheistic, one God. And the name that they ascribe to God is Allah, right? In Jewish faith, we talk about Yahweh. In Islam, they talk about Allah, but one God. Second is belief in angels, right? Just as we do. Third is a belief in the holy books that are sent to all prophets, including the Torah that was revealed to the prophet Moses, Bible that was revealed to the prophet Jesus, this is their language, and the Quran, which was revealed to the prophet Muhammad. Okay? So part of the belief is that there was 3 holy books. You have the Torah revealed through Moses, Bible revealed through Jesus, and Quran revealed through Prophet Muhammad, according to their faith tradition. The next belief is that there will be a day of judgment, and with that, a life after death. And the best reward for performing good deeds now in life is to get closer to God. The next belief is in divine decree. That means that God is all-powerful and nothing can happen without God's permission. However, God has given human beings the freedom to choose whether to be good or bad. In the end, everyone will be questioned about how they live. All right, so those are the 6 major beliefs. Okay? So then, there are also what's known as 5 pillars of Islam. Five pillars. All right? Now, I'm going to give you the interpreted word, not the actual word, the Arabic word that comes from it. But the 5 pillars, first and foremost, is a declaration of faith. That means, as a Muslim, right, you are to bear witness and testify that there's no God except one God, and that Muhammad is his prophet or messenger. Right? That is part of Islam. So one of the pillars is to bear witness to those things. Second pillar of Islam is that you practice ritual prayer. There are actually 5 daily prayers, and they're performed at dawn, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and night. The prayers are offered in Arabic, and they are done facing the direction of the Mecca, which is a holy site. Third pillar is charitable giving, giving of one's wealth to help the poor and the needy, or almsgiving, and alms tax as it might be called. The next one, number 4, is fasting. Muslims actually fast during daylight hours in the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar during a time called Ramadan. Now, the purpose of this is to remind people of the goodness of what they have and to show equality with the poor. Ramadan is a time for study and discipline. In our Christian faith, it's something that we would closely associate to Lent. Right? You think about how Lent is a time of fasting. It's a time of spiritual growth and inward reflection. Study, discipline, you see a very close parallel to the Christian season of Lent. So that's what Ramadan is for Muslims. Final, the 5th pillar is a pilgrimage. Muslims believe in making a pilgrimage to the Mecca at least once in their lifetime. But that's something that, if it is all possible, financially feasible for them to do, is to make that pilgrimage. So those are the 5 pillars. So that's some of the basics about what Muslims believe. If you ever wondered what is it they believe, how is it similar, how is it different, that gives you a sense to it. So as we look at the whole thing together, remember how we talked about there were the 3 crises again, right? Remember environment, personal identity, and cohesion. Well, when you look at the 3 families of faith, as we've detailed a little tonight, what do we see? The sacred is nature, the sacred is self, and the sacred is our relationship. Environment, personal identity, and social cohesion. And so the hope is some of the work behind this understanding, these perspectives, that look, if we rediscovered the sacred, not only in our own faith tradition, but in other traditions, is that we'd be better positioned to address these crises that we are facing in our world. But I want to talk specifically about Christians as we kind of wrap this up and bring it to a close here. As we think about Christians and looking at these other faith traditions, these other world religions, first of all, we would see that the sacred of nature and self is actually part of our faith as well. We don't tend to look at it that way, but in our faith tradition, nature is sacred, right? We talk about God as creating nature, okay? Now, one of the things that's different, though, from the primal, where the primal says, hey, we're just part of nature, we have in our teaching is that God made us stewards of nature. If you want a great reference, look at Psalm 8. That's a wonderful psalm to help shape that. But in a sense, that actually only increases the responsibility. That if we are stewards, that means we are in charge of, we are responsible for creation, for nature. And this is something that we have not tended to take very seriously in our faith, as one of those things that we need to recapture. Also, if we look at self, again, this is one of those things that's part of our teaching as Christians, understanding the sacredness of ourselves. Remember, we talk about how we are uniquely created children of God. We're created in the image of God. We talk about spiritual gifts, how Christ is in us and Christ is in one another. And so again, understanding our identity in relationship to God, particularly through Jesus Christ, right? Understanding our identity as a child of God rather than based on worldly viewpoints, we understand the sacredness of self. Finally, God revealed in our relationships the importance of community. You know, when you read through the Bible, how so often is the people of God, is the community. Jesus talked about where two or more gathered, right? The sense of relationship. And how our relationship with God is so often manifested in our relationship with each other. And understanding that sense of relationship, of sacredness, understanding our responsibility to one another. I think about as Methodists, John Wesley, we talk about rule number 1, do no harm and do all the good you can. Again, that sense of community and responsibility. So what I hope is that as we think about what other faith traditions lift up as being sacred, we see how that's really sacred in our own faith tradition, and that we would hopefully recapture that element of our faith as being Christians, disciples of Jesus Christ. Again, overall, I hope that this has been helpful as we went through these over these last 2 weeks and kind of taking that big picture, maybe giving you a way to look at other religions that you never thought of. My hope, I stated this at the very beginning, and I hope this has been true for you, is that this is about taking time foremost to understand, right? Because we have to gain an understanding first. That's just one of those steps. And as we gain understanding, we can learn to respect. Again, we're not saying just because we respect somebody else's religion or faith that we agree with it or we think that it's right some way. But it's about having a respect for where they're at and how they see the sacred. And in course, as part of finding that sacredness leads just to better relationships. That we start looking at someone maybe who is culturally different than we are to see how their culture is shaped by their faith and the goals of those faith, the practice of those faith, just as we are shaped by our own practices and beliefs. And as we gain in those levels of understanding, as we start tearing down walls and building bridges and gaining that sense of respect, learning from one another, seeing the sacredness in other ways that actually are part of our own faith tradition, that overall that'll lead to better relationships, to lead more of a peace. And as we think about monotheistic religions and Christians, that we look at, unlike Primal that says the world just is what it is, we look at it and say the world's not right. And our goal is to change the world, to bring the world into alignment of God's will, the way that God intended, right? Like kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, right? That's our goal. And part of that is through the relationships we have through others, through discovering the sense of sacredness. And so again, I hope that has been helpful for you. If you have questions about all of this, feel free to email me, reach out to me. I'll be happy to talk to you about it in ways that we can with everything going on in the world there. Again, I am not an expert on all the different religions of the world, rather some basic information, but I hope it has been helpful for you. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. So with that in mind, as we are wrapping it up at our time here, I just want to close this with a word of prayer. So let us pray. Holy and loving God, we know that you are present in the world, that you are active, that you are speaking, that you are teaching in ways we often overlook. And I pray, God, that we can discover the sacredness that is present in our world, the sacredness of this creation of yours that you have made us stewards of, the sacredness of ourselves, our identity, and finding our identity in you and our relationship with you, and the importance of our communities as well. I pray, God, that you will help us to be a people who strive to understand, who have respect, and who seek to build bridges and come together rather than tear down and push apart. I thank you for the gifts of your teaching. Just ask that your Holy Spirit would fill us, lead us, teach us, and equip us as we continue to move forward in this world as your children seeking to build your kingdom. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen. Thanks a lot for tuning in. As always, like I said, you can go back, watch previous content. Stay tuned. Worship obviously will be online again this week. We'll continue to go with that. We have some more classes coming up and working in some programming as we get on through the summer a little bit. But thanks for being a part of our church. Thanks for tuning in, and God bless you. Have a great night.